ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everyone else who's bothered to even get up to listen to this episode. I'm Barry Nugent, and as you can tell, Dave isn't here, and normally Dave would be doing all the boring intro stuff, which is what I let him do. But he's off on his normal summer travels. So I've been left kind of holding the bag as per usual. But I'm not alone. What I've decided to do is draft in some help over the next sort of few episodes. And the first person up to the, what's the thing you call in darts? Is it the Oki?
I think it's the Oki, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, if it's baseball, it'd be a plate, wouldn't it?
It is. So the first person up to the Oki, or if you know baseball, up to the plate, or if you're a podcaster, up to the microphone, or actually that's enough. So I am joined today by the lovely. I was going to say not lovely, but the lovely.
You can say lovely.
I can say lovely. The lovely Vince Hunt, who is one of the hosts of the awesome. I was going to say the awesome, and then I realised your show is actually called the Awesome Comics Podcast. So the awesome Comics Podcast, and the creator of Red Moss.
Hello. I might recall it Awesome Comics Podcast. I like that. It's got a nice ring to it.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. Yeah, but 306, man, bloody hell.
I know. Well, I was thinking the other day, and I was going to do a post, and I didn't. But because obviously we've had over the years numerous different podcasts on the sort of GS network.
Yeah.
We've actually put out overall I say we. Dave doesn't actually put any episodes out, so I have put out over 1,000 episodes now.
Wow.
Through the GS feed. But you say 306, but you guys are in 200s now.
Yeah, somehow, some way we've managed to make it to 200. 210 was the last one we did as we speak. But and considering it's a weekly show as well, that's when you think, bloody hell, I've been doing this for a number of years now.
So how I was going to say, before we kind of get on with things, it's a question I wanted to ask, because obviously when Dave and I started many moons ago, we were weekly. Now I don't
you
know
were one of the shows that I listened to before I even started, because there was Small Press Big Mouth, and I listened to Comic Geek Speak as well. That was they were the main ones at the time. Then I added Word Balloon to the list. So but I remember listening to you even before I thought, oh, let's do a podcast. But now everyone's doing it.
Yeah, if they could do it, Jesus, if they could do
it. Jesus Christ, I can do better than this.
How hard could it be? They're half cut most of the time. Wow. But I think, and we start because of, like you say, Comic Geek Speak. And I would put you guys, certainly listening to you guys, you definitely remind me of what Stace and Lee were doing with Small Press Big Mouth. In many ways, you guys have really picked up the indie gauntlet, which I think is great, because I think even though there's, and we'll talk about this probably a bit later because I'm interested to get your take on it. There's a massive explosion now of certainly comic related podcasts, and certainly UK comic related podcasts. And again, it's a weird thing certainly for me when we started, was people didn't even know what a podcast was.
Yeah.
Let alone what a comic podcast was. And I just think it's great that you guys really do focus in on the indie scene, especially the UK indie scene. And I know that I've been, because I think there's so much content out there at the moment, in terms of the indie scene, that I know I get lost to the point of I end up thinking that I'm actually not reading anything because there's so much stuff out there.
Yeah.
And that's before you even look at your mainstream stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know where to go, what to read. And I think you guys have been really good at sort of honing my tastes and sort of me sort of thinking, oh, I must check that. I know your last episode, not the last episode, the one before, you had on, she's going to kill me because her name escapes me, but she's the one who did the, because I met her at the same time you met her at
Rachel Lee Carter. You're talking about Rachel Lee Carter,
Yes,
yeah?
at the Comic Summit.
Yeah.
And she did the Nicolas Cage
love
comic.
that book.
You know, and it's those sorts of comics which I think so easily can slip under the radar.
Yeah.
Because there's so much out there. And it's not because it's not good, but there's just so much choice. And I think this is where we need more podcasts focusing on that and almost less on the mainstream stuff, because to be honest, the mainstream stuff is there. People can see that.
And lots of, lots of people, you see a comic podcast and they're talking about the weekly releases from Marvel and DC, and everyone's, there's probably a podcast talking about how Spider-Man shouldn't be this or shouldn't be that, and they're just ranting about it. It's fanboy rants that you can probably have with your mates down a pub, and as a podcast, it's not really that entertaining. It's not going to get me to buy any, probably most of the time it won't get me to check out anything. And like you say, there's so many podcasts that do that. Yeah. I certainly, and when people like find a podcast like that, if that's your bag, that's cool. And certainly I've listened to podcasts that talk about mainstream books, and I like that podcast, so I follow that. So I know that's a flavour I like. I'm not going to look for any more about like Marvel or DC because I've got this one that talks about that. So, and it's what we try to do is just be something a bit different. Like you say, small press, big mouth. That was like, because I wanted to find out more about like the small press scene and like indie comics, and especially UK indie comics. You're talking a niche within a niche within a niche.
Yeah.
So it was great what they did. I was listening to that all the time, and like certainly picking up books that they had mentioned. And so there was almost. There was a gap in the market, as it were, but that was partly it, and partly because I'm a wannabe creator as well. It was that there's lots of, as soon as you get into the, what this is like when you get into the indie publishing world or the comics world or whatever. As soon as you jump into the pool of going to convention, you meet so many wonderful people, so many creative people, and this is only growing every year anyway, but it was certainly, wow, there's this whole world that I didn't know about until I tabled at a convention. So it was, let's tell some more people about these different creators and books, and and when we started, there were certainly creators I got to know when I first, we got some of the creators we knew anyway on first, and then it's just, the net has just gotten wider. And also, selfishly, it's one of those, I just want to know how to make things better. And everyone's got their own way of doing things. So it's like, I've never done a Kickstarter yet, but I'm making notes every time we talk to someone that has. Yeah. Or, if someone's got a way of, I haven't started doing digital art yet, but whenever we have someone that talks about that, then I'm making notes and trying to sort of make the next thing better, as it were. And also, I think, and you probably know what this is like when you've interviewed people and stuff. If you come across well on a show, your work sells itself.
Yes.
And that's what I like about the casual nature. I mean, like Geek Syndicate and stuff like that. The shows that are a bit more fun and they're like a chat, they make you feel more involved in the topic itself. And we've had certainly people sort of saying when they're listening, sometimes they're talking to their phone or something because they feel like they're in the conversation. Yeah. And that's brilliant. Because you don't want an interview. Just say it's an interview. I don't like calling it an interview because most of the time it's a chat. But you don't, like, just say I ask you a question about your book. You give me a wonderful answer, and which would naturally open me up to then almost improv the next question. But instead of doing that, I just read the next question on the paper. There's a disconnect there, and I certainly see it with like movie interviews and stuff. But what I love about the casual nature of the show is, it's just a chat. And by the end of it, when you have people going, I didn't know about this creator, their work's great, or I'm definitely buying all their stuff. And that's one of the things we're most proud of. And certainly when we get some of the bigger creators on, who have probably been, on a few podcasts, they always send us a nice message saying the people that listen to your show have gotten in touch with me and they're saying such nice things, or they've picked up the book. They're always really touched by the listenership that we have. and it's a community, and that's one of the things I'm most proud of. And also, they put up with the horrible toilet humour that we put in every show.
And I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to completely flip the show, and this is going to be the main, and then we're going to move through the news.
Yeah, we had a plan. We had a plan. But I feel this is the conversation I kind of wanted to have with you anyway. Yeah.
And I certainly found through the podcast that I like to listen that I like that kind of. And podcasts have gone through this kind of big resurgence recently, and where people have suddenly discovered podcasts, where like most of us have kind of been like, we've been here all the time.
Yeah.
But it's because celebrities now have cottoned onto it, and David Tennant has his own podcast and things like that.
Every got a podcast, haven't they?
Everyone's got a podcast now, and but a lot of the difference with those ones is they're very kind of. They're still conversational, but a lot of the time why people are tuning into them is because you've got a big name hosting it, and then they've got big names on there, Whereas a lot of the podcasts that I like, it's not necessarily big names, but it's stuff that I'm interested in, and it's being discussed in an interesting way. And I always think that the best thing someone ever said about us, which is probably my benchmark for the podcast that I listen to, is they said it was like being in a pub and hearing two blokes on the seat on the table behind you having a conversation and kind of trying to lean back to sort of hear what they're saying because their conversation is more interesting than the conversation you're having.
Yeah.
And to me, that is a definition of the sort of podcast that I like to listen to, where, like you say, you feel like you could quite easily be sitting in the room with those people having a conversation, and that you feel that you could chip in and no one's going to make you feel, embarrassed for doing so or anything like that.
I mean, a strange kind of way, like the people on the show as well, if you have guests, that there's a safe space sort of mentality as well, because like we've had people that, even leading up to it, the introverts there, because most people we're talking to are probably sat at home hunched over their laptop or whatever, writing a comic, or they're that they may not, the big social situations away from a convention might not be their number one thing. So they're thinking, I'm going to be on a podcast. Oh God, this is the first time I've ever done a podcast. I don't know what it's going to be like. And we always say, look, just don't worry, it's just a chat. And within the first 5 minutes of talking to us, usually just before we press record, they totally relax, and then you just get gold. These people that are worried about how they may not listen to the show afterwards, because no one likes the sound of their own voice, do they? But
talk to Dave. He loves the sound of his own voice.
I'm just leaving that there. I'm not getting involved. I'm not being your Yoko. I'm not doing it.
Someone's got to be eventually. I'll just keep trying.
Is that what this whole experiment is about?
Pretty much. Traveling the podcast world just to see if I could find another Yoko.
There'll be a Netflix documentary about you just called Finding My Yoko at some point.
The downfall of Geek Syndicate.
Yeah. It's nice to know that my episode is where it starts.
Yeah. This is where it all goes wrong.
Yeah. But I there's so many podcasts now, because I mean, it's certainly it's gotten easier for a lot of people. Even it's been 4 years since we started our show, right. And it's certainly easier to podcast than ever before, and that must be tenfold since you guys started. I mean, what was your setup like when you first started?
Well, I remember. So again, it's a similar thing where when Dave kind of approached me, and apologies people who obviously already know the story, but when Dave initially had approached me with doing a podcast, it was because we'd lost touch with each other, and we would have these conversations 2, maybe 3 times a year. That's how little we spoke to each other. And when we'd have these conversations, they would last it'd be like 2-hour phone calls, because we were catching up on, because he was the only other kind of new, when he then said to me about, why don't we do this? I've discovered this thing called podcast, because he was listening to Comic Geek speak, and he was like, we could do something like that. And my first thought was like, well, I don't even know what a podcast is. So you had to explain, you had to explain it to me. And, you were talking about having those sort of people on who, don't like the sound of their own voice, don't really like to. I'm one of those people, which I know I've just said, putting out 1,000 episodes for it. TV, and we've done shows for BBC, and I say people still don't believe me, but I genuinely am terrified about public speaking, being in front of a camera.
I know exactly what you mean, because there is a certain, I certainly get a certain social anxiety, and if I say to my girlfriend, "Oh, I'm an extremely sort of quiet person and like nervous person," she's like, "Get lost." I've seen you at conventions. I've seen you doing this, but that's a different environment. And the show itself. I mean, I would say that doing this show, I don't know whether you've had it as well. It's given me a bit more confidence in those social situations as well.
Yes.
Because sometimes you get people that feel like they know you as soon as they talk to you, which sometimes is like, oh, slow your roll. Hang on, what's your name again?
Yeah.
But also it just makes, I don't know, it's just made me a bit more comfortable in those sort of social situations. When it comes to a family wedding, I will still be really quiet. Sit in the corner.
Likewise.
Yeah.
But, like you said, in terms of setup, was literally a USB mic that Dave brought up, which I still have. I should really give it back to him, but sod that. One USB mic. We had a laptop and 2 bottles of whiskey, and which we drank both bottles, and 2 pizzas, and we just sat and we just talked. Talked, and I think we've always been quite lucky, because luck's the wrong way to put it, but I think the best podcast that I kind of like to listen to is where people are friends. And I know that seems a bit weird to say, because well, obviously people are friends, but I've listened to podcasts where people have just got together to do a podcast, and maybe to begin with they haven't been friends, and they've kind of grown as it's gone on.
Totally get that as well. For instance, one of my best mates, sometimes we don't see each other for ages. We meet up and then you talk like no time has passed, and you just start talking about, especially the geeky things you love, like the latest movie trailer or game or whatever, and before you know it, 3 hours has passed.
Yeah, exactly. And our early episodes were like, 2.5 hours we were sticking out, because we were just chatting, and then obviously podcast became a thing, and then you were kind of being bombarded with, podcasts shouldn't be longer than half an hour, or shouldn't be like an hour, or shouldn't be this, shouldn't be that. And Dave obviously now teaches podcasting and stuff, and it's the landscape, and certainly comic podcasting, the landscape is completely changed. And we struggled to get people on to interview and things like that, and I had to, some interviews took me, one interview in particular, like 18 months to set up, and granted, we weren't just doing comic people, we were doing TV and we were doing film, and again you were battling that, people don't know who you are and stuff like that. And now you're battling, I guess it's probably more for comic podcasts now as well, where like there are hundreds and hundreds of comic podcasts.
Yes.
So it isn't that you can't just go, oh, we're this, and people automatically know who you are.
Yeah. And there is sometimes like some moments where, you'll have a guest and just say you've worked so long on getting that guest on. Mm-hmm. And because of that appearance, all of a sudden you see them appear on another podcast. And you know that probably maybe they've piggybacked off that, oh, I heard you on this show. Would you like to do this as well?
Yeah,
so you think, oh, I worked for ages for that.
And you've literally just sent an email.
Yeah.
I heard you. Would you like to come on ours? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, for people to go on podcasts, it's great because it's just helping get the word out about their stuff. And I know what you mean about the friendly chat as well. Because when we started our show, which is obviously, for those who don't know, there's myself and Dan Butcher, who's a webcomic creator, and Tony Esmond, who's like a writer and sort of comic journalist and stuff. And we only knew each other really through sort of social media. Yeah. And I had a lame brain idea of like, it'd be good to do a process sort of comic podcast, about it. And Dan said, yeah, I'd like to do that. And Tony said, I'll be up for it. So I went away and did my research and finding out about it. And I think I also messaged you at the same time, trying to find all the information I could before even trying the first episode. And then it was weird. Like the first episode is the first time I ever talked to Dan Butcher, but you wouldn't know it. Like,
No,
I mean,
you wouldn't know it.
because of social media and stuff. Me and Dan were sort of like, in parentheses, friends, if you know what I mean. Anyway, but we were already sort of it was already quite casual and chatty. The only thing that about the first episode was the clicking of the pen, because I was so nervous. I had a clicky pen and I kept clicking it, and I've never had a clicky pen since, because it picked up on my mic. So yeah, but since that show, since that one 4 years ago, they're like two of my best friends. Do you know what I mean? They're like family now, because and I genuinely talk to them more than a lot of my family, because I'm speaking to them weekly. Yeah, it is. I think that helps with the sort of casual nature of things, and when you've got that sort of environment as well, when a guest comes onto it, hopefully it's quite welcoming and puts them at ease. And even the guys that like. Sometimes we talk to some American creators or like publishers and stuff, and we will set the show up sort of like, because we like to have a guest on and stay with us for the entire show, if we can. But if there's like an American creator, and because you're talking about time differences and stuff, we sort of say, well, we'll talk to you for an hour and a bit. You can go on, then you can go on and enjoy your day. You don't have to sit through and here's our sponsor ad, and here's this and all the nonsense, and then I'll edit it together afterwards. But there's all the guests seem to be fairly comfortable within the first like couple of minutes, which has just been really nice actually. Especially when you talk to some names that I'm sure you've had it, when you talk to people that you've admired for so long, and you think about it after, just think, I'd never thought like 10 years ago when I was reading Wizard magazine, I would actually be talking to this artist or creator that I used to see in these magazines that they talk about. It's mad. It's mad.
Which I think is it's the beauty of podcasting, because it does allow you to do that, and it does connect. And I think as well, you realize there's a kind of responsibility when you're podcasting, because you do get a chance to promote people who wouldn't necessarily get promoted.
Yeah.
Through other channels, and bigger comic sites and stuff. And I've always firmly believed, like when we've read comics and stuff like that, and it's something that I've really loved, that isn't necessarily getting out there, that I feel like I really need to be pushing it, because I've got a platform. And even if it's a platform that only like 10 people are listening to,
totally.
That's 10 sales for that creator.
I've recommended most of the books. I think I've burned through most of the books that are on the bookshelf that were sat there. Some of the older books as well, because it's just some weeks it's just sort of like, look, you just need to read this. This is brilliant. And I don't like. There's a section of our show which is the recommendations. It's sort of like the sign off, as it were. I mean, because I don't consider myself a reviewer, and it's more like a friendly sort of like, I read this. This is cool. You should read it. And we get bombarded with a lot of like, oh, here's an issue for review. We'd love to be on your podcast and stuff. But the way we do our shows is we'll go and ask people. Do you know what I mean? Just because someone's got a Kickstarter, that they may ask to be on the show, and sometimes we look at them and go, well, you've never listened to the show, have you? This is just another step toward. This isn't what the.
Are those people? They normally start with like, their emails tend to start with hi.
Yeah. Hi.
No.
Big fan of your show. And then you read the email and you think, you've clearly never listened.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's all good. And like, sometimes we'll give a shout out to certain Kickstarter stuff. But when it comes to the recommendations, it is very much, we've read this, and we're very lucky. I consider myself to be hugely lucky to be given like review PDFs, or sometimes people will gift me printed copies of the book and stuff, and say, thanks for the podcast. That humbles me to no end. I love it, and I'm very grateful. I never thought that would have happened.
Yeah.
And when you look at some of these PDFs, and these aren't people that a lot of the time they're just sort of saying, oh, here's my book, just let me know what you think or whatever. And you read these PDFs and you think, this is amazing. Someone needs to know about this. It's a joy to be able to say something, and the people are always surprised that we mentioned it. They're like, oh, thank you so much. It means so much. But I'm someone, I don't know about you, I like discovering stuff anyway.
Yes.
So even beyond the ever growing to read pile of stuff I've bought, or the PDFs that come in the email inbox, on, for instance, Comixology, I'll always look at the new indie books. That come out that week, and I'll download something, and that's normally what I talk about, because I discover a gem that is from somewhere in the United States, and they've never listened to the show, they've never done anything, but I can just give them a shout out, and I know some of our listeners might like the book, and that's just, it's all about just spreading the word about good comics. Right, well, I suppose as I do a podcast about comics and talk about comics all the time, online, etc., I suppose I better recommend a book. So the one I've picked to recommend that I've been shouting about to anyone and everyone that will listen, and that's a book from Image Comics called Outer Darkness. The creators are John Layman and Afu Chan. I think John Layman's one of the minds behind Chew, if I remember correctly. But yeah, Outer Darkness, Volume 1, Each Other's Throats. That's a perfect jumping on point, thanks to Image Comics doing those lovely, buy a first trade cheaper issue, and Volume 1 collects issues 1 to 6. Now, what Outer Darkness is, basically, imagine Star Trek crossed with The Exorcist, or whatever horror movie you can think of. This is like a horror movie Star Trek, in a sense. That's the elevator pitch. All set around the starship Charon, which just is actually heading into the outer darkness of space, where lots of terrible things reside. And there's he's been given a new captain, Joshua Rigg, and he's got a motley crew of characters that become his. Well, literally, it's a motley crew, because it's his sort of starship crew, and they all hate him, and there's backstabbers. I mean, because the crew as well. Joshua Rigg he's not a Picard at all. He's more like, he's not a likable fella. Imagine it's like the Dirty Dozen. Every single one of these people on this ship has something wrong with them. They're all. It's like almost the Sons of Anarchy in space, because they're all on the dodgy side. There are people that used to be. I don't want to put any spoilers in it, because every issue of this is a different surprise, and they really the pacing of it's brilliant, and you're discovering characters with each issue. Like some of the issues do focus, and it seems to issues focus on individual characters. So someone that you think is just the navigator at the front of the ship, all of a sudden you have an issue sort of focused on them, and you discover that there's a lot more to them than you initially thought. It's also a book that like all of those great shows, you never know who is going to survive until the next issue. There's a brilliant. I mean, when I've been collecting it in issues digitally, as it was my favourite series of the year, I had to get the first trade as soon as I could. So, and after every issue, there is a sort of double page spread that lets you know who the crew of the ship are, and sometimes later on it says that some of them are deceased. This isn't your standard sort of Star Trek style crew either, because it's you have like a medic and a navigator, and yes, there's certainly things like that, and the first officer, for instance, who's a law unto himself anyway. You can tell that something's going to kick off with him. But there's also, they have an oracle on the ship that's almost like a witch-like figure. There's a mortician, and like the outer team, there's a mathematician on there. Like the maths come into it quite a lot. It's like maths and also spiritualism, because they have a team of exorcists on there, which is really cool. Like you get all these it's almost like Ghostbusters. You get like these demonic ghosts come out of space, and the chief exorcists have to use their sort of arcane magics to deal with them, which is amazing, and I love it. And they're all a different, they're all a colourful group of characters. It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, Afu Chan's artwork is absolutely amazing. It's almost like an animated show that you never realised that you always wanted. I'm definitely a fan of this artist from now on. I'm going to seek out their previous work, from the colouring to the character designs, and there's a lot of different character designs, and there's so much imagination going on this. I mean, for instance, every starship has like some sort of the light the warp drive or something like this, and this ship is no different. It just happens that their warp drive happens to be a huge demonic spirit that needs actual sort of sacrifices. Every so often it needs fresh souls to devour. So that kind of gives you an impression of what this story is. It may seem quite dark, but there's also there's a black sense of humour going through it. There's some nice comedy and wit. The art style really sort of juxtaposes with some of these darker elements that I've said. I mean, describing it, you probably think there's going to be a grim, gritty, and shadows everywhere. Couldn't be further from the truth. There is colour going throughout this book. And like I say, wonderful character design, fantastic characters. At the end of volume 1, it leaves you on sort of cliffhangers, and you don't know where characters are going. I'm currently up to date on issue 8, which has the crew dealing with a haunted house in space, which is literally a haunted house from Earth that seems to be floating in space. Make of that what you will. So yeah, I cannot recommend Out of Darkness enough. It's from Image Comics. You can get it from all good bookshops or your comic stores, etc. But yeah, it's pretty much going to be it's my favourite series at the moment. And yeah, more people need to read it. So go out and also follow the creators on Twitter, etc. I mean, I need to, for the credits as well, Pat Brosso is the letterer as well, so I didn't want to leave out anyone that's been working on it. I mean, there's tons of people that work on comics these days, but yeah, so Out of Darkness, go and get it.
Do you feel that, and obviously because you yourself are a creator, that plays into when you're doing the podcast, that you feel that kind of extra responsibility because you're walking the same road, you're fighting the same battles? Yeah,
definitely. Even without a podcast, I would have loved to be on other people's podcasts to talk about my work, and any platform to get people to know about your work.
Yeah,
it is amazing, and it is always you're grinding all the time, and which is sometimes an absolute joy. When you're on the height of that creative sort of moment, and sometimes it's a low when you've been promoting the same thing for the longest amount of time, but people still need to know about it all the time. That's why I quite like shouting out books that have been out for quite some time. It's not always about this is what's out this week. This is this is the latest book. It's like, no, I read this. It came out in 2017. I didn't know about it. I've discovered it. I think you'd like it if you discovered it too. It's that kind of pay it forward mentality, which is because it takes it goes back to when we were kids and stuff. When you're with your mates and you're like, oh, have you seen this film? This film's amazing. You should watch this. It's the same mentality.
Yeah.
I think a recommendation goes. Is it more favourable to a review in some ways? If there's people. Certainly, if you're listeners as well, because you've got to think about them. And if they get to a point where they've picked up a couple of titles that you've recommended, and all of a sudden they've loved them, there's a trust there. There's certainly a trust of thanks for recommending this book, I love it, or thanks for recommending this creator. It's wonderful. When I'm a fan of a creator that not many people know about, they come on and talk to us, and then all of a sudden more people are fans of them now. And more people, that get to know them. I just love that.
It's a really thin line, because I remember when GS was doing well and whatever, and we started up the website, and then we were getting people in to do the website and stuff, and we were doing reviews, and like you said, we were kind of, I'd say now we're on the kind of dip. I feel like GS is kind of going away a little bit because
I'm on it. That's why.
Because you're on it. You killed it, man. But it's a fight, it's everyone's doing it now, and
the marketing of podcasts in itself, because when we started, there's a little behind the scenes, when you're a new podcast on the block and it goes on iTunes, and you just called the Awesome Comics Podcast, for instance, and just that word in itself, the numbers that we had for the first few weeks that we were on or whatever were massive, and to the point of oh my god, and then they dropped because our show is that a bubble within a bubble sort of thing, and because I always just thought, well, if 100 people before the first episode came out, I thought, if 100 people listen, that would be nice. And and I'm under no illusions of how big we are or anything like that, because you've got to keep pushing it, and because the numbers sort of went down until they found a sort of comfortable sort of number that was regular, and it was steady, and then now they're slowly picking up again. So it's like, well, just keep doing what you're doing, keep grinding, and just getting the word out. And also it's hard with the sort of shouting about it as well, because I'm not a hard seller by any shape or means. I probably should promote it more than I do.
It's a difficult one, because then you get into that kind of, that area of like, why do you podcast?
Yeah.
Why do you want to have a podcast? And I think that question, the answer to that question, I think, is very different in today's world than certainly it was when Dave and I started, which is 12 years ago now.
Yeah.
And if people ask me 12 years ago, why did we start? It was because, and it literally was because I wanted to keep in touch with my best mate, and this was a good way to do it and have a bit of a laugh. And it's really interesting, even what you're saying, and it's no disrespect for you, but even when you're saying, like, if we had 100 listeners, that's great. We were literally thinking, if we get one other person listening who is someone that we don't know, that would probably blow our minds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I remember us telling our respective, and to show you the length of time, we told our respective, it was at the time, it was Dave's girl and my girlfriend, who we are now both, now my wife and now Dave's wife, and telling that we were going to be doing this podcast, and then, like you say, having to then explain what a podcast was, which you don't have that now, having to explain what, and my wife literally saying, who the fuck's going to listen to you two? And me saying, well, yeah, no one is the answer. Genuinely, no one. But this seems like a bit of a laugh. We're just going to have a go with it, have a bit of a laugh with it.
Yeah.
And whereas fast forward to today, and people are literally judging their podcast before they've even started on their podcast, recorded their first episode of, like, what listenership are we aiming for? Who is this aimed at? Who are we doing this for? How are we going to do our keywords? And there's this whole level that people are going to before they've even got started. And that isn't a dig on them. That's just where podcasts are now, you know? And even we're going to do...
I didn't put that much thought into it.
But do you know what I mean? Even when you're going to do, like, you're going to sit down and say, we're going to do an indie podcast. Right, okay, well, what's our market? What we're going to do? Who we're going to be talking to? How are we going to do this? There's all these questions that are coming up now.
Well, I think it's like any creative endeavor, like across the board. Do it because you want to do it and because you're passionate about it. Because if you're doing it, it's like and Brian Michael Bendis talks about writing. Write for yourself and people will pick up on it. If you're writing for someone else, that your heart won't be in it, and people will be able to see that, I think. And it's the same with podcasts. And also, if you're doing it to make money, are you mad?
Chug on.
Yeah.
You hear, like most things, you hear I actually think, fuck it, I think this is going to be the whole episode, and I don't care. But because if you're doing it to make money, there's a few podcasts out there that have, we're not one of them.
No.
And I've been drinking, so I say, we did 2 shows for the BBC. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
which were very good, by the way.
Thank you.
I wish there were more of them.
Me too. I could have quit my job. But when you talk about, here's the dark side, the black side of podcasting, in that when we did those shows, everyone was saying to us, well, that's your guys, in terms of your podcast, you guys are set. Everyone will just sit back because you're going to be getting TV shows, you're going to be doing this, you're going to be doing that. You guys are set, And there was an element where you can't help but not start to think that. The episodes came out, our podcast, we didn't really say, our podcast was like number 3 in the country. We were above, what's his name? Simon Mayo and the other guy, Mark Commode. They do Mark a podcast. Commode. Yeah, that week we beat them.
Oh, awesome.
The BBC shows, the two BBC shows I've been drinking. The two BBC shows we did, we're in top 20 on iTunes, and kind of behind the scenes, Dave and I were starting to think, well, maybe this is it for us. We've kind of been fighting, maybe this is it. Maybe we can quit our jobs, neither of which we were particularly keen on, and we can do the things that we want to do, the thing that we're passionate about as best mates together. How cool is that going to be?
Yeah.
And then sadly, that didn't come to pass. And then you're still doing your day job, you still got bills to pay, still got to carry on, and you got to pick yourself up from that. And it was really, really, really hard to do that.
Yeah.
It was really hard to do that. I don't know if that time will ever come again now, because so many other podcasts are there now, and it's, I don't know, it was just, stars aligned.
There's also been the huge rise of the YouTube show. Do you know what I mean? There's, I remember when like YouTube shows were, I don't know, 5 minutes or whatever. Now all these different websites, everyone's got a YouTube show now. Everyone's a sort of, I hate the word celebrity when it comes to YouTube people, but everyone is a presenter now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Of things.
Well, we went to I think it was a premiere for Ant-Man, and there was a load of, you get those bits where you got all the paparazzi take on the photos and stuff, and there were all these sort of kids there, and we're like, yeah, those guys, and they were all the YouTubers. If you want to feel old, I had no idea who they were, and it was like, yeah, and I had to ask someone, say, oh yeah, they're, and they told me a few names. I'm like, I don't know why I asked, but they were all the YouTubers, but I think, like you said, to kind of bring it back around, when people say, well, why do you keep doing a podcast? Because it's passion.
Yeah.
Because when I do it, I'm passionate about the stuff that I talk about, and I love to talk about the stuff that I'm passionate about.
And I think it says a lot, because you're still here. Now we talk about, like, there's loads of podcasts everywhere, there's loads of comic podcasts, and that's all well and great, and there's lots of people that are putting out great stuff there, but there has to be, you have to keep working at it. And there's lots of them that think that podcasting is the flavor of the month. I'll do a podcast, it's great, I'll get some friends together, and they do it, and if it's still going after a year, it'll be a surprise. Do you know what I mean? And that's why, and you guys are the same. I mean, this particular show has gone completely off structure because, even before we start recording, folks, we
I'm looking at the whole list of things that we're now not going to talk about.
Yeah. But that's what happens when you get two podcasters in a room, isn't it?
Yeah. We're still podcasting.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's having a structure to your show as well, because, even though, like, our particular show is, and this is the Awesome Comics podcast, people go, they'll talk about, like, their silly jokes or the great comics or, whatever our topic is that week or whatever. But I've always maintained that it should have a structure. There should always, you have your intro. You have your, I mean, we've got a little bit of a sponsorship ad now. It's the most unprofessional sponsorship ad you'll ever hear in your life, but it's always there because those guys help, us to pay.
Comic House, isn't it?
Yeah, Comic House, yeah, and they're great.
This is a great app which deserves to get much more airplay.
Yeah, definitely, and they're, and we've met Pete from Comic House, and we know that he's also just doing it for the love of it and just wants. Yeah. He's working on the same basis that we all are. We just want more people to know about this stuff.
Yeah.
And thankfully, with his help, it helps pay for, like, hosting fees and things like that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's like, and we're not off, like, buying new cars because of these sponsorship deals. This is just, So we have this terrible sponsorship ad, and then we'll talk to the guest. If you're going to put it in the simplest sort of terms, or or the topic for that show, if it's just the three of us, then you've got your shout outs, you've got your recommendations, and then bye everyone, have a lovely week. And but there's always a structure to it. Yeah. It can go off and it can evolve and it can go in different ways, but it always has to come back to that structure. And I've listened to shows before that don't seem to have a structure, and you lose you lose concentration in them within 5 minutes. You just these guys, if they don't sound like they're on some sort of path, then I mean, me personally, I can't concentrate on them, and I'm just sort of like, yeah, no, this isn't going anywhere, so I can't listen to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and also as well, I think because certainly I listen to podcasts when I'm doing all, sometimes it's when I'm cleaning, sometimes it's when I'm walking, all sorts of times I'm listening to podcasts. And because there's so many podcasts out there, I can be quite choosy.
Yeah.
In what I listen to.
All right then. Here's a question for you. What are some of your favourite podcasts that you listen to? And I don't know if you're anything like me, but people think because you're a comics podcaster, you go listen to nothing but comic book podcasts. I'll tell you I'll tell you this now. A lot of the podcasts that I listen to aren't comic book podcasts. And I'll give you some of mine in a bit. But what are the shows that you listen to?
Well, see, for me, I actually, and this kind of send people away in droves. At the moment, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. And
how dare you?
I know. And one of the reasons for that is because I'm knee deep when I'm writing, when I'm working on a novel. My catalogue tends to be pretty much exclusively movie soundtracks.
Oh, that makes sense, because if I'm writing, I can't listen to like songs with lyrics or an audiobook. I can't listen to anything with words. It's always just got to be music. Yeah.
Although weirdly, kind of a little bit different in terms of when I'm writing, I've got my catalogue is just movie soundtracks, but just moving from A to B, going to work or whatever. Nowadays, I'm listening to audiobooks because my passion is writing prose. Listening to audiobooks, I find that the prose and the structure and how people are doing things sits in my head sometimes more than if I'm reading. And I don't always have the same sort of time to sit reading the book as I do to listen. Yeah, because I'm not going to walk down the street reading the book because I will get knocked over.
I don't have time to sort of sit down and read a prose novel because I'm not like taking a train. I walk to work, like you say, and so audiobooks are brilliant now. I go through sort of periods of listening to quite a lot of audiobooks, and then I move to podcasts, and then backwards and forwards, if that makes sense.
But in terms of sort of podcasts, I mean, I do listen to all the podcasts over the years that we've had on GS. I listen to because that's part of the reason why they're on GS. But I really like I think it's the Slash Film. I think they're called the Slash Film podcast.
I've heard of those guys.
Yeah, I really like those guys because they've got great banter.
Yeah.
And they have differing opinions, and they're quite happily to argue over each other on it, which I really like. And one of the guys is a massive Marvel fan, and he's so passionate, and that's my thing. That's my thing. If people are passionate about something, it doesn't even matter if it's something they're passionate about that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
I just love hearing that passion rather than it being, we're just going to do a podcast because I feel like podcasts are the things to do, and I feel that will be a good way to get me on to the next level. So there is that. And I do listen to you guys, and it sounds like, oh no, you're on now, so I've got to say that it's slightly standard. But yeah, I do listen to you. I'll be honest, I don't listen to every episode, but I don't listen to every episode of every podcast because what I tend to do, which is why, and I'm rubbish at it. I am rubbish at it because I've got lazy years. I tend to look at the blurb for the episode, which is something that a lot of people don't think about.
No, I know.
I certainly don't, and I feel it's quite important because I look at the blurb and go, actually, I quite fancy what they're talking about today. I'm gonna check that one out. And other times I look at it and I go, nah, that's not really for me today. So I'll see what they do next week, rather than that kind of religious. I'm gonna listen to every episode.
And I think that's what's beneficial about doing a show like ours, where it's not sequential. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we're not talking about the latest thing. We 1 week, I think we had like a month of genre shows. I just decided to do that, and you had like a Western one week, a Kung Fu one the next week, or something like that. And that was always based that if you were interested in this genre, you listen to that show. But if you're not interested in something else, it doesn't matter if you don't listen to it. It doesn't matter if you miss a show or you don't listen to it. That's fine. But it's nice if there is something that people are interested in that they can discover it.
But also I think, and I still think one of my all-time fave podcasts is Comic Geek Speak from back in the day.
Yeah. I must admit I haven't listened to them much recently because they changed to a sort of different format, didn't they?
Yeah, and I haven't. I mean, I think because Pete Reus, he was the kind of the main guy.
Yeah.
Sort of moved on, and that's kind of, to a certain extent, when we sort of moved on, or I moved on from listening to it. But I'm still in, but he still follows us on Instagram, so yeah. I love Pete. Yeah. And I just used to love when they used to get into these big debates over stuff.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, and I think part of it is the difference now is because there are so many podcasts, but back then there just wasn't. So hearing people talking about comics in the way that you would only talk to your best mate about, and there was no one else that were having these conversations, and yet here was this thing I could put in my ears where there was these like 3 or 4 guys that were kind of sitting around having these same conversations.
Yeah.
That I think is a joy of podcasting, much more so. And I'm not, it sounds like I'm dissing the famous one, like your David Tennants and all that. And I don't mean it from that point of view. But for me, one of the things I love about podcasting and listening to podcasts is that it's regular people that I could just see down the pub or see at a convention that would just sit in, being passionate, talking about the stuff that I would talk about. Yeah. That I could quite happily pop to Thought Bubble or pop to a convention and see those people, go up to them and go, hey, that stuff you were talking about X, Y, and Z the other day. I love that. That was really.
And you see these people light up as well when someone goes out and goes, oh, I heard you on this show, and they're like, oh, really? That's always nice to see when people get recognised from stuff like that.
So my question to you, sort of moving more into the realm of sort of conventions and stuff. Actually, no, I've got another question for you, actually, which is, do you feel that you are sometimes a bit torn because obviously you now host whether you like it or not, you now host a successful comics podcast.
Sorry.
You do. You joking. Look, at the end of the day, you did a live podcast and people rocked up to it. That to me is a very definition.
Yeah, that's true.
If you've done a live podcast and it was just you.
I honestly thought it was going to be.
Yeah. I remember you guys were like, yeah, we did a live podcast. I was like, way, okay.
Yeah.
That goes.
Yeah. The original plan was let's just meet up in a coffee shop somewhere. Let's just record it live so we're all in the same place, and then it turned into something else.
Keep it small, yeah. But you have a whatever you measure success by, you have a podcast which has listeners. And people who are interested in what you have to say. But on the flip side of that, you are also a comic creator who tables at many conventions. Whenever I see you, you're tabling. So, do you find a conflict of interest sometimes with that?
In what sense?
I suppose when I'm trying to think of the best of a way to phrase it, not in the best way to phrase it so you don't get yourself in trouble. That's not what I mean. But
in a sense of like, am I aware that a lot of people might know me more for the podcast than they do for the stuff I do?
I suppose so. What I mean is, so when we used to sort of head off to conventions, we would do like a special, and we would then talk about the convention, what we liked, what we didn't like, and we would be. And sometimes we could be quite critical and stuff like that. But in many ways, we didn't have a horse in the race at the time, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
We were 2 guys rocking up to... And back then, I wasn't publishing my own comics or anything like that. Not that it would necessarily have influenced me, but that would certainly be at the back of my mind.
Yeah.
So to give you a hypothetical situation, someone launches a new convention, and you go there to sell your wares with your own table and stuff, but also you're going to be reporting from there for Awesome Comics podcast. And that convention was awful.
Yeah.
Or had a lot of problems. Let's put it this way. Had a lot of problems. So then you've got that kind of dynamic where you come back and you've now got a report. You've now got to do a podcast to kind of report back to say what you thought about it. With a view that we know that a lot of conventions, when they start up, quite small, they've got stuff to learn, but then they grow. I mean, I remember Thought Bubble when it first started, and you look at where Thought Bubble is now, and then they grow and they can become this massive behemoth of a convention. Is there a worry that, oh shit, I don't want to?
I mean, when we do the show, I mean, we always try. I mean, I personally prefer to look to the positives of everything anyway. And there's been times where we've just visited a show maybe, or I haven't tabled, and it hasn't been that great. But and certainly, I mean, I think I've been quite fortunate that all the shows that we've been guests, we've got a guest table for the convention and stuff, have been, we've really enjoyed them. We've had a good day, and I think partly because when I'm at a convention now, because we have the listeners to the show, there's a fairly steady stream of people coming up just to chat anyway.
Yeah.
So it's become tenfold more of a social situation for me, especially in some of these conventions that I know a bit more. So I haven't touched wood. Had the moment of sort of going, we had a lovely time, but here are the problems. I'd like to think we would. I mean, certainly we did an episode recently that was about MCM, our first MCM experience, and we had heard, and there were fairly popular shows and still are in the lead up to it, because we were talking about selling at MCM and then surviving the MCM experience, because I'd never tabled at one, the London show, and we went to that show. And it was me and Dan Butcher, and we had the awesome pod table. And we were thinking, right, we've heard so much about this. I think we built it up so much in our minds. We thought, we bought stock thinking, people are going to be ready for what we're ready to sell them. You know what I mean? We'll get rid of lots of cards for the podcast. More people will know about the show, with the numbers that came through the door.
Yeah.
But over and it was a 3-day show. After the 3 days, we didn't do very well at all. We didn't do, and I think it was quite a quiet show for a lot of creators. And to not address that would have been wrong. To then sort of say, oh, we were at MCM, what a great experience, and just put a smile on it, because, having to lug the heavy luggage back when you all the stock when you didn't expect to be taking home. So that was why we did one that I just called the honest episode, where we always said from the beginning, we're going to talk about the show, and look, this is our experience of it, because I knew that probably some people did well, some people probably did worse than us. You can't go into a show and just sort of blanket blast it, if you know what I mean, just sort of say this show is terrible because of this, that, and the other, because there was hundreds of people there, and some people probably did really well from commission. I saw people that whenever I went to talk to them, because I tried to get some interviews at that show, whenever I went to talk to them, they were always busy. So it's not like it was dead for everyone, but we weren't busy, so we had a show just to talk about, well, what do you think it was? Was it us? Was it just a show? Was it, and we discussed those sort of things. And that was a strange one, because there wasn't a definite, well, they didn't signpost this, or people couldn't get to our tables or things like that. There was no, it was a crazy sort of like, we don't know why this was like this. People just, that weekend, people just weren't in the mood, they weren't buying what the indie and small press scene was selling. And, you see it from you see those classic shots of an MCM floor of thousands of people everywhere. And when I was in Comic Village, I thought, gosh, really quiet. And then I popped to the loo, went up the stairs and saw that scene, and I just saw people everywhere. And I thought, that wasn't what I just experienced. So I think there are times when we've been at shows, and sometimes it's a bit quiet, and but I think whenever at a convention, we try to sort of highlight the positives of our experience.
Yeah.
Which I think most of, like, especially the indie cons, because they're putting in so much hard work to get the word out about it, and that's why we try and put the shout outs whenever we can. We try and highlight the positives, and certainly people are coming over and talking to us, so we're giving shout outs to all of these people. But MCM was a clearer case because no one knew us, if you know what I mean. Apart from, like, the creators we knew within that area, we thought this is a new audience. So we weren't already sort of playing to the fans, as it were.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're not put in that position of like, well, that was shit, wasn't it? It hasn't happened yet, and thankfully, the shows we've been at have all been fun, and there's been a couple of times where I've been at this is before the podcast, I've been at conventions and just walked away and just thought, oh, that was terrible, I'm not doing that one again.
Yeah.
And I can tell you off air, but I'm not.
Yeah, no.
Some people talk about some shows, and you just it's like you hear them talk about them, and you just think, that was your experience? That wasn't my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time, if a show's put together, a lot of it just it becomes subjective to. And I've done, and I think I wanted to ask you the question because I think we're both in a similar situation where it's different hats. Because I now have tables at shows where I'm kind of selling comics, I'm selling books, and vice versa. But also you've got a podcasting hat on at the same time where you're going to come back and obviously you kind of want to talk about the show from that point of view. And it's a bit of and I think sometimes it can be, I've always been very honest about, the stuff that we've done and things like that. And the reason I asked you is because we had a situation years ago now. And I think when you're a podcaster and you start to get stuff in speech marks, I think that's where you first get tested.
Yeah.
And we started to get stuff, and we had people writing for us, and we were getting invites to go to see films and being sent DVDs and games and blah, 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 blah. And I remember a particular person who was working for us at the time, I'm not naming names, and a lot of the stuff we've talked about, I think we've talked about several times over the years, but I think this story I don't think I've ever really talked about. But yeah, they're someone who wrote for us, great person, still is, so it's not about that. And they'd done a review for a film, and it was a very positive review, which was fine because it's always been about someone's opinion on something. And then I happened to see a comment that same person had made on Facebook, and it was kind of quite the opposite to what they'd done in the review. And I'd sort of challenged them on it and said, well, why did you do that? And they said, very innocently had said, well, I was worried because I didn't want to say what I really thought, because I was afraid that if I did that, it might stop you guys from getting stuff in the future. And I kind of I did have a go. And I kind of said, I could give a fuck. Because I said, what you need, what you don't understand is actually the only thing that we can control is our honesty. As podcasters, that's it. That's the only, people listen to us because we're being honest. And to a certain extent, people listen to, again, forgetting your David Connection, people listen to your random podcasters that they don't know, that, aren't famous people, because they're people like them that they could live next door to or whatever, and it's their opinion. They're listening because it's someone's opinion and it's someone's honest opinion on something. So when I listen to you guys and you say, do you know what? I read this comic the other day by such and such. It was brilliant. I fucking loved it for all of these reasons. I will listen to that and go, you know what? I need to go and check that out because
and I
those
think that's
guys...
one of the important sort of distinctions of that is, and it's the classic, if you haven't got anything good to say, don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
And so, and certainly we've had stuff that we've had, like, you know, I was talking earlier about the stuff we get sent, you know, the PDFs and stuff, and it's wonderful. Some of it we're not going to like, or one of us will like, and the other two won't, or, you know, or, you know, it's just not our bag. And I mean, there's some brilliant stuff that we just haven't had a chance to recommend on the show yet. But if we can't, if it's not to any of our tastes, we just won't sort of mention it. You know, rather than just sort of talk about it and go, thanks for this, it was great. What, you know, that blanket sort of statement, because then you're not being genuine. And if you're not being genuine, then, you know, it just defeats the point. You know, I think it helps as well because I don't consider myself to be a reviewer as such. You know, and that's why I call it recommendations. Do you know what I mean? It is literally, we like this, you should check this out. And because I just don't like the idea of like people, and people certainly are, people set up these YouTube channels or these review sites or whatever in order to get those press passes, or in order to get like these freebies, or to get, you know, tickets to this or this, that and the other. Anytime I feel cheeky whenever we went to the 2000 AD event. And I remember I saw you about that. I didn't get a chance to talk to you, you know, the 40th. And we managed to get in. Thankfully, you know, we managed to get press passes for it, and we talked about, you know, and because we got those, we talked about the show extensively on the podcast. But when I sent the email, I just thought I'll never get this. I just feel shit because I don't go round asking for these things. So when I sent the email about it, I just thought, oh well, if they tell me to sod off, that's perfectly fine. Well, you know, I don't deserve it anyway. So when they sort of said, yeah, of course, you know, come along, I was like, oh my God. And it was an honor. These things should be an honor if you're getting freebies, rather than I deserve this. You know, it's not about that. It never should be.
And I think the last thing I say, and then I want to ask you one question, and we'll wrap up. And this is a bit of a, you know, I think this story is to show why I married my wife, why I love my wife, and why, you know, my wife and probably Dave's wife are kind of like the heart of Geek Syndicate more so than Dave and I, because I'd been sent, this is years ago, it is years ago, and I'd got to a stage where I was being sent books on a weekly basis, as in prose books. Yeah. And I'd been sent, but it was a massive parcel that turned up, and it was sitting there, and I'd had all these other books, and I don't get a chance to. I struggle with reviewing prose books because I'm a prose writer. I'd rather someone else do it because I feel it's a bit too much in my wheelhouse for me to be doing it. And I said something to my wife. It must have been a flippant comment. It was a real throwaway comment where she said, "Oh, what's that? Really exciting. Oh, it's another book I've been sent for review." And she looked at me and she went, "Don't you dare do that. Don't you dare." She said, all the work that you've put in to get to this stage where someone, you know, where and it was a big company, it's a big company, you know, they're now, you know, they're sending you stuff. Don't you dare, even if you're not reviewing it, don't you dare behave like that. And she had a right, and from that, and it was a real reality check. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It was a real reality check for me to kind of like, and I've never behaved like that since. And it's interesting, you know, hearing what you say about it. It's a privilege when you get stuff like that. It's a privilege, and that's how it should be treated. Yeah, it should not be treated as an everyday occurrence. Yeah. It should be treated as a privilege. And
if people are sending your stuff, you know, sometimes under the pretense of a review, should we say, then you shouldn't just rip them up. You know, you got to be nice to these people as well. You know, always respond if you can, you know, and be nice about it. You know, or be respectful if you're like, oh, thank you very much for this, but you know, it's not for us. You can do things like that. But because we've all done it, we've all sent stuff out for review, and that's nerve wracking as it is.
We know, exactly. As a creative person, we both know what it's like. You know, and I've been on my fair share of, incredibly harsh reviews, so we know we've walked that walk,
Yeah.
But I think that the final sort of question I wanted to ask you before we both try and go back and save our marriages.
Yeah. What's my ideal Sunday?
No, because that could be another hour for both of us.
Yeah.
Is you got, and it's a cliche question, but you've got, I'm not going to say 3, I'm not going to say 1, I'm going to say 2. Someone wants to start a indie comics podcast. What are the 2 pieces of advice that you wish someone had given you?
Oh, wish someone had given me. Oh, that's a difficult one. That would be to suggest I had any kind of plan to begin with.
True.
Well, I can give blanket advice. Like, don't. This is a really good question. I didn't expect it from you, Barry.
No, me neither.
The advice, I guess.
If it helps, my wife is saying she's waiting.
Yeah. So, Oh God.
Crack on.
Right. Well, I would say I've never been under so much pressure in all my life. It's like, who wants to be a millionaire? I would say be prepared for the work, because it is a lot of work. Now, I don't just mean about recording. Recording's the easy bit, especially if you've got a good team or good group of friends or whatever with you and whatever. That's a joy. But you have to edit, and then you have to post, and then you have to shout about it. And I don't spend too much time editing. I know that can be a rabbit hole in itself, but it is a lot of work. You can't just put a podcast out and then expect everyone to listen to it either, I think. And because it seems easy because everyone's got a bloody podcast these days. But it's not. And I remember speaking to you at Birmingham one year, just before, when I was thinking about doing a podcast. I remember, and you were talking to me about editing and how that would take quite a bit of time and stuff. And these are all things, and get advice from whoever you know that does one. The other bit of advice I would say is just a simple one. Invest in a decent mic. First bunch of shows, the microphone actually on my Mac laptop was pretty decent.
Yeah.
I never had a problem with it. I just decided to sort of upgrade, and I just got like a sort of one of those sort of snowball sort of microphones.
Yeah.
And that just immediately leveled it up. And you don't have to pay through the nose. People, if you look on online articles, people are saying, oh, you can get this microphone for like £250 or whatever. Nah. You don't have to spend lots of money to sound a lot more professional than you think. So I say invest a little bit in some programs or some, microphones. If you want your podcast to sound professional, well, I say professional. We're not really professionals, are we? But, put the effort in, and it will come across in your listenership and the way the show sounds, which is important because you're going to have to listen to that show when you edit it.
Yes.
So yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So yeah, just prepare. That's what I'd say.
Good advice, sir.
Other than that, good luck, and may the force be with you.
Nice. See, I can't add anything on that. So on that note, also I'm in my office, which is now pitch black. So
my office is very. I'm in my office, and the humidity has been rising through this entire recording. That I tell you what, you're lucky this isn't a webcam show, because bloody hell.
Likewise, my office is in my garden, and it's like a small kind of contained shed thing. Which is lovely in the winter because I have the heating on, it's all toasty and warm. In the summer, it is basically like...
It's a sauna.
It's like the Great Escape, and I'm the cooler king, and I'm just like sweating buckets. So, I need to get out of here and just dive into cold shower and go to bed. So what I will say is 2 things. One, I will be getting you back in to do a special on soundtracks, because everyone's missed the first half an hour because I didn't start record where we just talked movie soundtracks.
Dude, never mind a special. We need to set up our own series.
It's a whole podcast. You're right. We're gonna talk, not tonight because I need to go to bed.
Me too.
I feel like we need to now have a talk about doing a movie soundtrack podcast. I genuinely believe we need to do that.
I mean, there's so many great sort of soundtracks and composers out there at the moment, but the thing that's always fresh in my mind, and I know a lot of people love this, and it may be an easy choice at the moment, but I am loving Stranger Things. I'm a big Stranger Things fan anyway, so I'm all about Hawkins. So with its sort of weirdness and its monsters and its gruesomeness and the great comedy and everything. I mean, that's enough in itself. I would love the show, but I am also a huge fan of sort of like retro and synthwave style sort of music. I've used it as inspiration for some of the sort of comics that I've done. I worked on a comic called Murder Road, which was set in the 80s, like proper John Carpenter style. And that had like I made a Spotify playlist that was enormous, made of lots of synthwave sort of music. And so as soon as the first episode of Stranger Things, you had like the pre-credits sort of cold open, as it were. And the music, the theme tune from, I believe that it's Carl Dixon and Michael Stein, that when the theme tune kicks in, I knew then. I mean, you've got the wonderful credit sequence that sits with it anyway. Being a graphic design and font nerd, I mean, that is totally my jam. But it's when you get a Netflix show, and there's always the skip intro. And for instance, for most shows you do, don't you? Because you want to get onto the actual show itself. That will never happen with me with Stranger Things, because I love watching the credit sequence anyway, even though it's just the words. But the music itself, that wonderful sort of, that almost rhythmical heartbeat of a rhythm, going with like the retro synth, and nothing too heavy as well. There's not a hugely, I mean, it's a strong theme without being a hugely strong theme, and it perfectly sets up the show itself. Which also, I just love the way it ends as well, with this. It's almost a really atmospheric sort of soundscape sort of noise, and then you get like the sort of title card for each episode as it zooms towards you, perfectly in time with the music. Yeah, the Stranger Things theme tune is I think I'm going to go and put it on. I can't believe I haven't got it on a playlist. I mean, normally I'm just listening to like the soundtrack and stuff, but I need to put it on a playlist somewhere because it's brilliant. And it's iconic. It's already iconic. I mean, obviously the show's become a cult hit, but this has gone above. And and as soon as you hear the first couple of seconds of it, you're in the zone. And for that, I just absolutely love it.
We didn't talk about any this. We just didn't talk about the stuff we were going to talk about. It's just not a Geek Syndicate episode. It turned into kind of just a podcasting chat. But that's really good because I don't really get a chance to really properly have those sort of conversations. So
it's been lovely.
Thanks for taking the time to come on, Vince. It's been great.
That's all right. Do I? Should I tell people where they can find me?
If you had given me a chance, my next line was going to be, it's not my first rodeo, mate. Do you know what I mean? Fucking hell, done 200 episodes, suddenly you're the man. Just give me a chance. My next line would have been, and where can people find your podcast?
Jedi.
Yeah, a bit more of an Anakin, I reckon. Jeez, I thought I'm going to have to cut off your arms and legs next and leave you to burn.
Well, I'll tell you what, the heat in this room at this moment, bloody hell.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah.
So, where can people find your podcast, sir?
You can find the Awesome Comics podcast at awesomecomics.podbean.com. We're also on, if you do Spotify, iTunes, all your networks and stuff, you can find us out there. It's usually about an hour and a half to 2 hours of indie comics fun. So
and It's a great show, and I heartily recommend
Oh,
people
thanks,
go
dude.
check it out. Certainly, if you are looking for new indie comics to check out and don't know where to go, what to do, hit these guys up because it's a great podcast.
Yeah, and we've got some exciting sort of guests coming up, like publishers and convention people and stuff as well, over the next couple of months. So yeah, please join us.
Cool.
Yeah.
So on that note, you can find us on Facebook, on Twitter. You can email us at thegeeks@geeksyndicate.co.uk, and I will be back maybe next week. We'll see. Maybe with someone new. We'll see. Don't know. Isn't it exciting?
It is, and you've been an absolute legend considering you're suffering with a cold. So
I am, which will be edited out hopefully. in post production, it shall be edited out. So all that remains is for me to say, Geek Syndicate, we're out.